Hello, so we're getting, so those of you who've just joined, all we're just doing is we're sharing just where we're from, location, location and also level. So some people are just saying that they're from Northern Ireland, they're Essex, you're a GP partner. So there's a mix of different levels. So what I'm seeing is there's some people who are at foundation, there's international medical graduates, there's consultants, but all different specialties as well coming into the room, which is wonderful. That's great. And so we're just about ready to kick off. Oh, this is wonderful. So what I'll explain here, it is being recorded, the session. I will ask one of the team just to let you know about how it's being shared, and that they'll come through on that as well for us. So thank you for that. Tips about improving NHS profile. I'm going to do some things on that for sure. And so there's a couple of questions that are very specific, and one of the things that I may well do, brilliant. So one of the moderators just said that it's going to be shared on the platform for you in terms of information. So what I'll do, everyone, it's just time to start. So I'm just going to thank you so much for introducing yourselves as we started to kick off. This is so helpful for me. I'll introduce myself properly in a moment. I just wanted to explain the two different sections. So there's one called conversation, and the conversation one, I mean, it doesn't matter which one you use, but the conversation one is great for if I'm asking you a question or if you want to kind of build on something that I'm saying, which would be really helpful. And then in the question box, which is the one underneath it, what I'm starting to get here is different types of questions that people are interested in understanding more about, or specific things that are important to them. What I thought I would do is, on the whole, I've got a number of things that I want to share with you, and I've split it into two halves. Although what's really relevant is the CV activity. Even if you're doing a lot of things for the NHS profile and application, or you're working on activity within Oriel for your activity there, either way, what I'm sharing is relevant for both. So I'm going to cover the beginning part on CVs, and then the second part, I'm going to look at the competency-based questions really within the NHS profile, and I'll do a little bit on that. And then what I thought I would do is basically run the session. I've got the questions there, and then I'll look at those and group them thematically to answer as much as I can. Obviously, there's nearly 300 of us in the room, so I won't be able to do every single question, but I'll be able to group them. And where it's relevant, I'll bring it into the session if that's all right with everyone. So that's my plan of attack for the time that's here. And so do feel free to share, where you're based and your level in the conversation back to start. But just in terms of this session is due to run between now and 1:40. My plan really was to run the session for at least until 1:30 with an opportunity for questions, and then we'll see how all that goes in terms of time. So that's my plan of action, and this is great. So I can now see everything that's coming through, so thank you. And then in terms of one of the things that we always just do is sort of share our kind of interest in terms of declaration of interest, and the only thing that really for me to share is that I run my own business called Wonderif. I specialise in career planning. I've been doing it. I love it. I've been doing it for about 15 years now. So specialising in clinicians, clinical academics, and also entrepreneurs, so doctors who also set up their own startups. And so in this area, that's what I've been mainly working on. And I write on the topic, I deliver sessions, and I also do a lot of one-to-one work as well. So a combination of things. So that's really what's taking place. And so for me, the first thing that I was going to do was just share a little bit about the kind of objectives that I want to try and cover, and make sure that we've got all of these in order so that you're happy with them. So what I thought would be really helpful to do is, there is actually kind of like current trends in the way that a CV might look, and actually particularly if you're coming to it from a different part of the world, it might be helpful to just know what are the kind of usual things that you'd expect to see in a UK style CV. And then the second part of what I really then want to do is to look at some of the competency questions on NHS profile jobs, and just think about what kind of good way to make sure that you're delivering on all the relevant skills and experiences you've got. And then finally to bring up on the supporting statement. So that's my sort of plan. And then I can sort of see as well, so thank you, Craig. So one of the things is that you're based in Wales, you're currently in Bulgaria, and you're interested in working abroad and building your CV and portfolio. This is all really helpful. And then I can start to see some other questions that I'm already thinking about, gaps in CV, I've got the one on international, which I'll already have in my head. And then we've also got things around, this is a brilliant question that I already can see, which is on, you know, what if I don't have an audit or a quality improvement project? What about that? So this is all brilliant. Thank you so much. And then one other question I can see. So all of this is going to come in this first section. So first thing I'm going to do is do a poll. And thank you so much for launching the poll. I just want to get a real sense within the room who's at what stage in their career. So hopefully it will be covering most stages. So if you can have a look at this poll now and answer it, then I'll be able to kind of view it, and then we'll be able to see where we are with it. So if you're able to have a look at that now, that would be great. Thank you. And I'm just going to make a little note so I can see who's with us as we go. Just general grouping. Yeah. So let me just have a look here. So I'm just seeing within the room now where the mix is. This is just what I want to see, actually. This is brilliant. Thank you all so much for doing that. So what I'm just having a look here now. I think almost everyone has had a look at that. So you'll all be able to see as well. But for the, yeah. So for those who are other, just for a moment, could you just put in the conversation section your background, if it's just in terms of where you are, if it's other, just so that I know where I am. And if it's working in private practice, great, but I just want to just know what that is. So what I can see here, just to double check with the audience, so we've got kind of just under 20% junior doctor, which is kind of a full range. Then we've also got foundation, and then we've also got GP consult. So there's a mixture of different levels here. Not so much people with a portfolio career as yet, although you may well be aspiring to. That's fantastic, and that's great. Good, I can just see everything now, fabulous. So we can close the poll. This was really for my benefit, so that I got a good sense of the, yeah, thank you so much. So I can see physician associate, thank you. Trust grade, great, thank you. GDL student, wonderful. So what I want to do is just to make sure, the reason I wanted that was I just want to get a sense of the breadth of the groups who are here, so that I can know there'll be a whole range of health professions in the room, and whatever I'm sharing is going to be relevant for all of you. So that's just the key thing I wanted to get a sense of. One of the first things I want to tackle is thinking about the flow of a medical CV. And then I want to build on a couple of things relating to that. So looking at layout and two techniques. One is thinking about a technique called gapping. So that's GAPPING, but I'll share it. And then something about how, when we're writing our CV, and this is relevant for anything that you do, a technique where we just think about the wording, and it's called parallelism, which I'll share there as well. That's great. And so what I'll just do now is bring that up on the screen, and you'll see here that there's a screen here where it talks about the flow of a medical CV. And what I'm just going to do is just spend a few moments just talking about some of these areas and bringing things in. There's a problem with the sound, so I just want to just check in with the team to make sure that you can all hear me, if that's all right. A couple of people are saying they've got a problem with the sound. Oh, sound is fine. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, there's a few people saying they couldn't hear. Wonderful. So what I was going to just do, if you're able to just come with me from the top, there are a few things that are total must-haves that you need in your CV, and there are some things which are really up to yourself. It's up to you to decide whether you want to do them or not. One of the things within the UK is there's no right or wrong way to put together your CV. It's your story to tell. But there are a number of things that you want to think about in relation to your CV. So what I would say is that based on career stage, you may well find that your order changes. So for example, if you're at an earlier stage of career, so you're a medical student or you've just recently sort of graduated, you may well find that your education and qualifications is first. And then I'm just double checking because there's a setting cog. I'm just double checking. Let me just see. Just wanting to make sure that, can everyone still, it seems to suggest I'm coming in and out of sound. Is that still right? Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm getting mixed. Okay, thank you so much. Wonderful, everyone. So personal information, the key things that you need, obviously, are your name. If you're an international medical graduate and you've already got your GMC with license to practice, then what you want to then do is actually put your GMC and your number underneath. I know that that might sound obvious, but I see a lot of CVs where people don't do that. And it just means that you're ready and good to go and work within the UK. It just makes sense to do that. You also want to have how to get hold of you. Just use one email. Sometimes I see more than one. Just use one, contact detail mobile. If it's relevant for your industry, some people have started to put in a LinkedIn profile link to their CV, but only if you feel it's relevant and it's something that you actively are doing already. You don't necessarily want to create overwork for yourself. So in terms of the personal information, it's just how to get hold of you, really. So you've got your name. What you don't need in there necessarily, unless you want to, because it will be elsewhere in an application form, is you don't need your marital status, you don't necessarily need your nationality unless you want to, or even your date of birth. There's no requirement on the CV. You will find that you will add things in an equal ops or on an application. So it's just to kind of give you the heads up on that. The one next underneath is called profile. You can call it profile. You can call it a kind of like a personal statement. Sometimes people call it a career objective. It's really up to you what suits you the most. But what I would say about this is no more than 3 sentences. Let me give you an example of one just so that you get a sense. So it could be bilingual medical graduate with 4 years of experience working in X, Y, and Z environment with an active interest in medical education and leadership. As a skilled communicator, I'm now looking to combine my academic and professional experience and pursue a career as a junior doctor in... I'm just making it up. But what you get a sense of there is I've got more than one language I can speak. I've got areas of interest which are both potentially clinical and non-clinical, and I've got a direction of travel. So I just want to make sure that within that, you have that opportunity within that first point to be able to do that. There's been a growing trend after the profile in the UK to highlight clinical skills. So for example, these may well be ones which are really relevant for the role that you're going for. I'll give 2 kind of base level ones, but suturing, say lumbar puncture, but whatever they might be, the key thing, if you're going to highlight clinical skills, is to make sure it's really relevant for the role that you're going for. So I think that prioritization of those is very helpful, because what you're basically doing, you know, in the conversation function now, how long do you think it takes for someone to read a CV on average? Just put something in on the chat function when you've got a moment on the conversations to let me know. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm getting a nice mix of things from people there. And so what I can see there is someone just saying a few seconds to a few minutes. And on average, it's roughly a minute and a half, but sometimes it can be less. So what you really want to do is to make thinking easier for the reader. And so what I would say is, as much as possible, everything that you put on your CV needs to count. Now, these ones are more matter of fact, but for education and qualifications, the most recent first working backwards, I see some the other way around. So just to flip it to make sure it's the most recent first working backwards. If you have got qualifications for PLAB 1 and PLAB 2 that are recent, and you've got your GMC license practice, you may well want to include that and when you got the date for that too. Then in the employment section, the reason I'm just mentioning this now is terminology of words. So I sometimes see the word work experience used, but actually that's paid work that someone's done. So if it's paid work, please make sure that you put that as employment. And so I just wanted to make sure that people, if they've got the word work experience, it's because they're doing internships, observerships, or it's actually part of, you know, something else that they've done, which is voluntary-based work in some shape or form. So just to be clear on that. Similarly with your employment, what I would say here is also to make sure with your employment that you are grouping it. So for example, if you're a consultant working in psychiatry, for example, you may well have very specific clinical responsibilities, but you'll also have patient management responsibilities. And what might be useful to do is to think about subheadings of grouping. And whatever you do, you make sure the most important is first, the first bullet point, the second, and so on. And then the other sections that are in here, languages and IT, and then each of these sections are really based on your level that you are at the moment. So presentations and posters and awards and prizes, you'll see that more often in an early stage career, or more for people who are academic and other things that they're doing. As you go through your career, it may well be that they're not necessarily there in the same way. You will always have courses and conferences that you're attending. And as much as possible, if you have it, you would also include headings that include quality improvement, leadership and management from a medical context. Internship is unpaid, it's work experience. I've just seen something from Maria pop up. It's an internship, you would call it, that's your work experience with internship. So you'd have a heading with that, which is your internship year, Maria. Thank you for asking. And so then you'll have your teaching and education. And then the other ones are all based on whether you have them or not. What I would just say as a pointer, just to note, are just these ones at the end here, is with the voluntary experience, I often see people not putting that in. And the reason they haven't put it in is because it's not medical. And I would just urge you, definitely put it in. Make sure that it's in, because the reason for that is that there'll be loads of really good relevant experience in terms of the audience that you're communicating with, whether it be fundraising, what the experience is, who you're dealing with. So definitely put that in. And then Hannah, you would put that under employment, F1's employment. In the internship or year for some other countries, if it's not paid, it would come under more the internship work experience. It's for international, but your one, Hannah, definitely, yeah. So yeah, I mean, Alina, yes. So for the voluntary work, which is there, and then the two areas underneath, sometimes people don't include interests. And so the other thing to think about, the reason why we've got interests is mainly to see how you switch off, so the other thing to think about with that is, what do you do outside of work to help you? And then what I'm starting to see here, yeah, so I've got a person here, would you put in unrelated, yeah, so if you've worked in another career elsewhere beforehand, so you've done other things in other sectors, then you would certainly put that in as your other experience that you've gained. So you might well have that heading professional experience and put those in. Melina, I'm going to do a section on teaching for separately, because the teaching one is really important, particularly in relation to competencies. And Laura, sport, interest, definitely. And so that would go in there. Now, Andrew's asking a question, and this is really about relevance. So one of the things he's just asked there is about courses and conferences. And so for me, there is a rule of thumb within them that in the last 5 years, but the question really is if you've done something that was really important and relevant to your career, then I think that you may well want to include it, but this is your personal choice. I think that for courses and conferences and things like that, you definitely want to do this. And one of the questions that I also just seen there that's relevant to just bring up at this time, I just want to scroll back up to get that. So it was just there, which was, so after Andrews was this, yeah, where is it? It's Marie. Yeah, so the HR role. Yeah, so one of the questions that you were saying was that someone had said they've got a pre-role. So what you might well do is have two headings. One might be, you might call it, medical employment or clinical employment, and then you might have other or professional. You might have clinical experience and professional experience other. So there's two different ways of doing it. Just decide what suits you the best. And then I think there's a few other things that people are asking about. How far back do you go? I think that in a sense, you will know yourself about where you feel. So if you're at an early stage of your career where you're just finishing medical school, you may well feel that you want to bring in some of the things that you did throughout medical school and before. But if you are at CCT stage, you would not do that, because it wouldn't be relevant, because it's too far back. So what I'm really trying to get at is to think about, it needs to be relevant. You also want to make sure that you're showing, and one of the things that Sunil's saying there is that continuity. And that's why if say you're in pediatrics and you've been throughout the course of your decade developing an area where you've subspecialized in a particular aspect of neonates, you want to show that track record. And so I think it's really important to feel like that you've got that opportunity to do it. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, but I'm starting to pick up questions. So I'm just going to make sure. There's a few questions that people are asking around the length of the CV. So I'm going to come on now. You'll see on the screen now about layout, and I'm also going to bring in length. So I see a lot of CVs, all at different stages. And what I would say is that for the majority of people, they tend to have between 3 and 5 pages tops. Some people who are academic, they will have a longer CV. And what tends to happen is that they may well separate out and have a publications as a separate one, or they embed it in, depending on how many. But the key thing really to think about is what you've got on there. It has to really be relevant for the role. So the psychology of the CV, if you imagined your screen at the moment as you're reading, if you can see my mouse, as you read across the CV, your eye is drawn from left to right and it navigates down. And so the key thing that you want to be able to do is to draw the reader in to the selling points that you've got. You do want to have space. I've seen some CVs recently where there's loads of white space on one side and actually everything's squished in and you can't read it properly, which is really important to get right. Font, color, and photo, just for a moment. In terms of font, the default font that comes up in most people is Times New Roman. If that's your favorite one, go for it. But what's quite useful in terms of the eye is a sans serif, so an Arial, a Calibra, and so on. Color on your CV, I guess for many people, if they're printing it out, it's not relevant, but if they're seeing it on the screen, it has to suit you. You know, so if you're going to use color, and what I mean by that, I don't mean necessarily bold on your CV, I mean using another color to say black. You just have to think about making sure that you're friendly, you know, in terms of your coloring if you're doing it. For me, I tend to stick to it being black and white, but that's my preference. And for your CV in the UK, you don't need to have a photo. Just to let you know, just in case. And you'll see on the other side of the screen there, I've mentioned something which is called positive action words. So positive action words are things like implemented, created, developed, led, initiated, contributed. Those words are ones which are known as positive action. And the idea being for those is that if you decide to do a CV where you're using bullet points, instead of I have experience, and you might well want to say contributed and so on. The other thing I'm going to share with you is something called gapping and parallelism next. But I'm also seeing some questions coming through around career gaps, and then also thinking about, so for example, there's a couple of questions coming through on specific things, which I'll definitely bring up at the end. Yeah. And also for people who have gone into medicine with having another career, I'll bring up that towards the end. So I've seen those. Thank you for sharing them. I'll make sure I've got those in. That's great. And I'm just going to move on to show you something which is called gapping for a moment. And I will also talk about gaps as well, so career gaps. So gapping is something different. So basically, this is a technique where if you want to, it can be very advantageous to do it. So what you'll see here is this is not gapping at the moment, but you can see on the screen, I taught a full lecture hall of students at UCL twice a week. I also marked their assignments, so the content there is good, but the technique called gapping, I'll show you how it actually looks in practice. So this is just a way to think about how you can increase your impact and perhaps removing words which are not needed but still get to your point across. So this one here is now a gapping example where what you can see here, I've obviously added more to it, but you've got the date, you've got what it was and where it was. And then what I've done here is it is in the most important order that I believe is right for this role, but it's starting to set the tone. So responsible for, plan the design, supervise, but it's doing more than that. It's telling us the number. It's helping us to visualize a set of 5 participants. You've got this idea of thinking about what's the topic, what was I doing? And then finally, the feedback, where you've got extremely positive from students and staff alike. I can also see a couple of people are asking a little bit about their stages, about prizes and achievements. If you're at an early stage, so Sarah, for example, you're going from medical school into your F1, you definitely want to include all of those things still from school because they'll be relevant to you, I think. So just make sure that you can do that. Now, what I'm now going to do, if it's all right, is I'm going to share with you. So there's this technique of gapping where you start to think about how you actually use your content and make sure it's accessible to the reader. There's something else now, which is actually called, let me just move it on now, which is actually called parallelism. And I'll just explain this because it's more about how the reader goes through your CV. And it's a way that you use your phrasing. So you'll see here on this side, there's editing, delivering, mentor, and group. What I've actually done here is, in order to help the reader get to the point as succinctly as possible, I've made the actual phrasing, you'll see here, there is as much as I can an ED at the end: edited, delivered, mentored, led. And so what it is that I'm using here ings and then different phrases, and actually the content, on the whole may well be roughly the same, but the actual idea in here is that it's just punchier and it gets us more to the point. So it's really helpful to have that to hand. So it's just to share that with you, because I thought that actually, in terms of thinking about the CV, so there are two things I just want to bring up now. One is, do you know if you've had another career before moving into medicine? So for example, if you've gone into a graduate entry, so you've had a completely different career, now you've moved into your clinical practice, you want to include that experience, because that experience makes you who you are. All of us are unique and have these things that are there. So what's really important is to think about how you group that. So you'll have your clinical experience, which will be current in terms of your activity that you're doing there, and then you'll have your other employment that you did before. And probably what you want to do is, depending on how many years, you may well group that to bring out some of the transferable skills that you have within it. So if you were working in another industry such as finance, you might well bring up something around, the communication, the analytical thinking, the aspects of problems, because all of those things are relevant to what you were doing in this role. So I think that in a sense, that would be really sensible to do. What I'm now going to just start to build on is just thinking a little bit more about some of the competency questions that you actually get on NHS jobs. And this will bring in aspects of teaching and a few other things around that I want to build on, which will answer a few questions that I saw coming through. And then I just want to make sure I'm just running through some of the questions now to just see what's going on, just to bring up. That's great. So with the competency questions, this is where, when you go into NHS jobs, in the profile, there's lots of detail that you have to fill in that's factual. And then there are some sections where teaching, management of change, management and leadership, teamwork, and then the research and publications, in a sense, is more matter of fact. What I thought I would just do is just share a little bit on a few things around, if you're filling that in, and this is still relevant to your CV, but if you're doing something on teaching and medical education, there's two things to think about. The teaching that you do, you may well have informal. So if you're thinking about it, bedside board, where it's on the go, or you'll have formal experience, which is, case-based presentations, lecture, symposium style of things that you've done. Whatever you do there's a number of factors to bring in. So in terms of teaching, you want to think about, who was the audience? How many people roughly were you teaching and supporting? So what you're getting a sense of, was it one-to-one, one-to-few, like one-to-many? How often were you doing it? Was it just ad hoc, a one-off, or was it something which is more consistent? So you were doing it over a set period of time. What were the topics? So the key thing there that I often see is people mentioning about teaching, but forgetting some of this, which is really valuable to do. And then the other thing to really think about with that was the kind of impact. So what I'm asking for there is context, describe the situation, what you were doing, action, what did you actually do, then actually what's the result, so what was the impact of it. And in a similar way, that works extremely well for thinking about management and leadership. Now, management and leadership doesn't need to be something overly grand. You could have been managing the rota. You may well have been leading an activity that's connected into the BMJ, where you've taken on something that you're doing that you're interested in. Leadership and management doesn't need to be a big L. There's lots of things that you can do in this space to help you. And thinking about that area, it needs to be relevant as much as you can do. And it doesn't have to be clinical. Let me just be clear on that. And many of you will have brilliant experience that is also non-clinical to share. With the management of change, it's very specific on the NHS profile. It's usually in the last 5 years. And so within that, there's quite key things it's asking you for. Description of the change, of course, what the aim was. And then also there's one section towards the end where it gets you to think about what was the conclusion or action of this in terms of what you brought in. So I think that there's a few things that we want to make sure of that you kind of do there. If you haven't got publications or certain aspects of research, then you can't fill those in. But if you have, great. The final one on that, the teamwork, one of the things that I think is useful is that you will all have worked in teams. And what's key about this is actually the narrative. So being able to think about, you as an individual working in the team, what do you actually contribute? So if you're able to give an example to bring that to life in the NHS profile one, it's really helpful, because you can then set the scene, you can say what the context was, you can talk about what you were asked to do, what the task was, what you actually did, and then looking at that result and reflection, what did you learn by doing it? And if it's a multi-professional team that you're in, even better. And if it's relating to something which is either to do with patients or colleagues where you've been able to support and help grow the team, fantastic. But either way, just really think about that, because there's a number of things in here that you can really start to do to kind of to build that knowledge there. So Alice is asking the question, it's the ED, Alice. So one of the things is keeping it consistent. So within that one, where you're doing the parallelism, when you have the ings and the ors, you're using a different end. It's actually harder to read. So what you're allowing someone to do there is mentored, and then instead of mentor. So things like that. Thank you for just double checking. That's really helpful to have there. The BMA have fantastic activity for applying for jobs and writing on your CV. So if you can, after today, definitely do that, because it's and it's also got some really nice sample CV as well that you can have a look at as well, which I think will be really helpful for ideas as well. And then the other thing that some people are asking just at this point in time, they're asking about online webinars and other CPD that you're doing. In the current landscape, anything that you're doing for your continued professional development counts. Of course it does, because you're always learning and doing it in particularly different formats, So yeah, so for sure, if you're doing something online, it definitely counts. The other thing that I just want to bring up here, and one of the questions so in terms of CPD, I'll bring that up. That's great. Thank you. And the other thing, yeah, this is wonderful. Okay, yeah. So see one, do one, teach one. So one of the things that is being brought up here, so this idea of thinking about what you're actually doing and how you're contributing. Thank you for sharing. That's great. I want to bring up, just to kind of start to bring this up, and then I want to get some of the questions answered, is in the supporting statement, this is right at the end of the NHS profile. It's a white space. And one of the things that's really important to think about within the white space is to really understand about what you're trying to do there. Now, there is a very specific aspect that they ask for. They ask you not to repeat what you've already written. And so one of the things that's really important about this is you've had a factual account all the way through, and the supporting statement is designed to really give you the opportunity to talk about why you're applying for the role, how your skills and experience match with those examples that link into the person spec. So what you really want to be doing is bringing that to life, that enthusiasm to show that you're confident in your abilities and you see how this job is a positive opportunity and challenge. And then you want to provide evidence of that clarity of thought, that, you make sure that the statement is structured. And someone mentioned before, not to kind of ramble. I think as well, you want to be as succinct as you can. I see different ways of people doing this, and there is no right or wrong way. But when you've got the essential and desirable criteria, sometimes if you've got things that you want to highlight, you may well have the heading within the job spec and then saying how your experience is relevant. But I think what's really important within the supporting statement section is really your motivation. What kind of sets you apart? Where are your interests, your areas of expertise? It talks before, one of the audience mentioned about, the years of experience that they've been working in their field. How does that help you to add value to where you're going next? The other thing that's really important is to think about how your values connect into the values of the trust and the organisation that you're going with. So the other thing to definitely do is to have some knowledge and really have a little bit of a look at what is going on within the trust, the GP practice, the area that you're applying for. And if you're doing a role which is more kind of, I think there's some pharmacists in the room, when you're doing things like that, it's the same thing. You would always do a bit of the research on that first. And I think that the final thing really is to bring that all together. I will Andrew's just asking to clarify the management of change. I'll do that. And so one of the things at the end of it is just to bring something together where you're saying, hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that I've got the necessary skills and experience to take on this challenge. And I'm looking forward to working in organizations such as yours because of, and you may well have the values that connect in. Andrew's just asking, and I'll just go back to this for a moment. Andrew was just asking about the management of change. Within the NHS profile, there is a section which basically is looking at quality improvement and audit, the title at management of change, and it has your most recent audits or quality improvement that you're doing. And then in one section, it then asks you to go into more detail. So it will ask you, so the aim and things like that, so that you've got it. Yeah, if you've still got the current role then of mentoring, you would keep it as an ing, but it's more in the past tense. So just hearing a couple of people asking that. What I'm going to start to do now is I'm going to just group a few of the questions just so I can start to see a few things. And then I'm just going to, so I'm looking in the question box here, but I will also look above in the conversations one too, if I can, just to start to bring things together. So one of the questions there is, if you haven't done any quality improvement projects, you can't, it doesn't matter. You will, for example, you will get to do things in time. Not every country does audit and quality improvement projects, so you can't include it if you haven't done it. Obviously, if you've worked on innovation and change and been instrumental in doing that, then you can talk about that instead. So I'm just going through here. There we go. Just have a little think here. I'm just having a look at a few of the questions. So I'm asking, so there's a few people asking the quality improvement there. Yeah. I'm just looking through about some of the questions. So I thought there was a few questions on career gap. So if you've had a gap, now the gap might be different. So I just want to take it in two ways. If you've had a career break, so what I mean by that is either a break to have children, a break to look after a family member, or you've had a break to do research, had a break to travel, or had a break to do an out-of-programme experience, which is called an OOP in the UK, then you definitely want to include that experience. So it's really important to be able to have that. And actually, you definitely want to do that. What I see, if it's something where you've had a period of ill health, I'm just trying to see whether there is anyone who's had that question. So I think as well, you may well find that if you have had a period where you've had an unplanned career break, in terms of thinking about your CV, I think there was a couple of people asking about that. And I think in a way, what you really want to be able to do there, it's really your own personal choice about what you want to say about that. But the key thing really is that if you're doing chronological CV, then you probably will have had a career break, and you could just simply put career break, or you've had a gap. The other ones that I can just see there, if it's something that's been more extensive, so you're having a career return. So one of the things I can see above is that someone's had a break for 10 years. So they may well have been doing something else during that time, a combination of things that are not necessarily medical. So what I would say there is that if you've been doing that, you want to group that together to make sure that you highlight what you've been doing during the time away, but you can group it as one paragraph. I don't think you need to write every single thing. There's a couple of really important questions about bullet points versus text. There, again, I said at the start, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but sometimes when an individual's reading it, if you have too much of a paragraph, it can be very difficult to read. And because you're scanning, I wouldn't want anyone to miss the important information that you have. And I see most people at the moment doing more bullet point than paragraph, just to answer that question. Then I can see here that someone is asking about the personal statement versus profile. So what I've got up on the screen here is a supporting statement for NHS jobs. So if you're going through that, you would have something which is called a supporting statement. A personal statement would have at the very beginning of your CV tends to be no more than 3 sentences. And then I'm just having a little look at just a few other things. Just bear with me a second as I go through. Because we're a big group, there's lots of questions that I'm not going to get a chance to go to everything. But I do want to take something. So there's a couple of people asking about, as an international medical graduate, what can I do to help myself to be as employable as possible? I think there's a few things on that. And I guess the key thing really to do here is to make sure that you're putting down all the experience that you've got, and making sure that, first of all, it's the most recent first. So sometimes in other countries, it's the other way around. So you must flip it that way. For other things to do is to be really clear that you've put on your GMC, to make sure that you're highlighting the clinical skills that you've got, particularly. So if you're a general practitioner in some countries, that is not the same as the UK. So what's really important for anyone who's doing work abroad, that they really highlight, because they're working in a hospital, is you want to highlight your specialty. The other thing that I think is invaluable to do is the hospital that you're working in, or the GP, if you're working in the community, you want to basically tell us the size and scale. Like if you're working in a hospital which is renowned for cardiology and it's based in a particular country, we don't know that it's the specialty for that. So you want to say this is a specialist area, the number of beds it has, so I get a sense of the pace and activity of what you're doing. And then there's someone asking questions around references. And I think that one of the things that I just wanted to say is, so references, you can say available on request, or what you can do is then provide 2 or 3 references. The key thing really is to make sure that they're the most relevant for the role. Now, what I'm starting to see here, maybe I can just look at one more kind of question. I'm just having a look through, just trying to see here, gaps. Yep, done. Okay, let me just have a look on this side here. So I'm just double checking on. There's a couple of things around terminology. So just if you've done an observership, a clinical elective, you know, and that was something that you were doing at the time, then that would be, you could call that clinical experience for sure, and group it that way. I'm just trying to have a look at anything else. Yeah, I'm just having a look at all the different things I can, because we're almost coming to the end of the session. I want to be as helpful as I can. I'm just trying to just see the last few. Brilliant. I'm just seeing here. Okay. So someone is asking, this is the next step that I definitely recommend doing, is a few of you are asking, is there a template available? So one of our last things to kind of do is, there is a fantastic, so on BMJ e-learning, there is a really amazing resource there, a piece of e-learning called Medical CVs and Applications. One of the things that's in there that you could download is a sample CV, which I think if you need that to kind of get a sense of it, that is definitely a takeaway to do. Now, I'm just running over time. I want to thank you all so much for all your contributions. What I would just say here is, I can't answer everything. I'm so sorry that I can't do everything, but ALSs would go into courses. But thank you so much for all your energy. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'm going to start to bring ourselves to a close. Thank you so much. Take care.